Something I'd learned in my long years was that hesitation killed more warriors than nearly anything else. So I lunged. He jabbed forward with his own knife, raising his arm to catch my wrist. On instinct, I batted the knife away with my forearm, blade scraping up the armor, and I pulled my knife hand in slightly. No longer going for the throat, I plunged the dagger into his palm. Unfortunately, I fumbled it. It turns out that talons not actually attached to your paws had a nasty habit of getting stuck, and I no longer had the physical strength to tear straight through. I cursed, but his mistake corrected for mine. He dropped his own blade, reaching across to pull mine out. Fool, I thought with relief, as I ducked down to pluck his weapon from the cobbles. You tend your wounds after a battle, not in the middle of one. Any dragon that didn't learn that died very young. I rose to find him kneeling, unable to muster the courage to pull free the knife. I snorted in disgust. Grabbing the back of his head, I opened his throat. I turned to see how the boy was faring with the other man and froze. They were both looking at me, knives drawn in horror. And then I understood. Where did the kid get a knife? My eyes drifted to the older man's belt. 2 sheaths, only one knife in hand. I growled viciously and ripped my own knife from the corpse's head, shifting his to my left. 2 talons for 2 necks then. A footstep sounded behind me, and I glanced back to see the carpenter from earlier. He wore a modest short sword on his hip, though his arms were folded across his chest, and he made no move to draw it. "This was your doing?" I hissed, tensing myself to leap forward. He rolled his eyes. "Of course it wasn't my doing. For someone possessed of the level of snark you portray, you're unbearably naive. You followed a street urchin into a narrow alley. What did you expect was going to happen?" He drew his sword and leveled it at the 2 remaining assailants. "I'd suggest you leave. Swordian's dagger aren't good odds, even with 2 of you." They glanced at each other. "They're not going anywhere," I growled and made the stride forward. He caught me by the back of my collar in mid-step. He was remarkably strong, and I whirled on him, but at that moment I heard the sound of rapidly retreating footsteps. "Don't you know it's rude to interfere in another's duel?" He quirked a smile at me. "Duel? And when, pray tell, did cutting up street thugs come to constitute a duel?" I sighed, battle light flooding out of me. I very nearly started to lick the blood off my talons before I caught myself. Wouldn't do to have him see that. I dropped down and began to wipe the blades on the dead man's clothes. "So how is it that you come to be here, to find me, cutting up street thugs?" "I followed you." My head snapped up. "What?" He rolled his eyes again. "I saw you flaunting that bulging purse around the marketplace, then actually pay that urchin to lead you out here to be robbed, or worse. And I thought it might be a good idea to follow, to be sure you didn't get hurt." He glanced at my knives. "Unusual way to wield a blade. They teach it in the far west." The lie came easy. "Talon style. Though these knives are not the best suited to it." He raised an eyebrow, but changed the subject. "Were you really going to kill that kid?" "He led me into a deadly trap. Would you rather I kissed him and offered him a copper?" His gaze was implacable, but he said nothing. Indignation peaking, I reached down and cut the dead man's purse strings. Every instinct in my body told me to add it all to my own, but I reluctantly held it out towards the man. "For services rendered." I spat with venom. He gazed at me for a moment longer, then simply said, "By the gods, you're a real piece of work." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me mute, furious, and purse still in hand. A deep growl rumbled in my throat as I watched him turn a corner, and my arm slowly dropped down to my side. The sound of the purse clinking to the ground barely registered in my mind. It is a rare thing to make a dragon so angry to ignore a treasure won in battle. This man. I balled my hands into fists, turned on one heel, and strode off in the opposite direction. I silently resolved that I would destroy his precious storehouse on every visit I made here from now on, until he finally died or gave up. The enmity of a dragon is a terrible thing to earn. He would find out soon enough. The town that had previously so fascinated me now left me with a sour taste in my mouth, and I decided to leave. There are other towns, and larger, down the eastern road. I'll try one of them. After a frustrating hour of searching, I was able to find the east gate and strode out under a noonday sun. I noted that the guard didn't ask people who were leaving any questions. That seemed odd to me. Sure, you want to know what people are going to do while they're here, but you don't even care to know who just up and left? Half their ledgers were probably filled with now useless information, and they'd never even know which parts. I snorted. Mortals. So short-sighted. Perhaps that was why they all came to me for the same fool reasons, spouting the same fool answers, using the same fool tactics. None of them lived long enough to learn to think ahead. I smiled ruefully a moment later, remembering my trek down the mountain slopes. Well, maybe it's a more universal failing than that. I became rather lost in musing about the similarity and differences between mortals and immortals. Admittedly, dragon culture was much more decentralized. Too many apex predators in one place and you get some nasty conflicts. Living so long also led to the possibility for very long-lasting grudges, so the smart thing was, never offend anyone you can't kill, because you'll have to. I'd watched enough human conflicts as I soared among the skies to know that somehow they managed to have long-lasting grudges like that too. How does that work if they all die so soon? Attempting to puzzle it out left me not paying attention to where I was walking, and I stumbled over a rock, crashing to my hands and knees, both of which I silently cursed at the spikes of pain they now throbbed with. God damn this weakness, I hissed in my mind, as I slowly pulled myself back to my feet. As I got up, I noted 3 men standing side by side across the path. Were they there before? I couldn't be sure. They all wore somewhat mismatched leather armor and leaned on spears. They were looking at me.
"Seems a rough fall, ma'am,"
the one in the middle said.
"Didn't do you any mischief, did it?"
I shook my head wearily, eyeing the spears. "No, nothing lasting," I put in. "May I help you 3 with something?" He smiled amiably, a very carefree but slightly apologetic expression.
"Well, ma'am, I'm afraid this is a toll road. Folks as want to pass has to pay a fee."
I blinked. What? Why would someone have to pay to use a road? It's just a stretch of dirt. The man nodded sagely, as though allowing it did seem proper unfair.
"Well, my fine lady, as it happens the king needs to send soldiers to patrol the roads, keep 'em free of bandits and such. As it happens, that costs money, and they're raising the money by implementing tolls."
My expression blanked. Ah, that was it. I'd killed enough royal soldiers and messengers to recognize the uniform during my raids and plundering. So they're after a bit of coin from the ignorant folk of the outskirts of the kingdom, where they might not know better. It was an interesting scheme. I wonder how many people would fall for it. As I eyed the spears, I wonder how many people would fall for it, come to that, just to avoid bleeding. "How much is the toll?" I asked, though I was really only weighing my odds of being able to handle them with my daggers, or if it would be necessary to fight them with magic.
"I'm afraid it's 50 silver tenants, ma'am,"
he said apologetically. Inward I groaned. There was no way he could ask that of almost any of the people who normally walk this road. I glanced down at my bulging purse. He obviously just sized up his marks and picked a value he thought he could get from them. I need to conceal this better in the future, I mused. I allowed my eyebrows to climb way up my face. That's quite a toll. Perhaps it might be easier if I leave the road altogether, and cheaper too. A dangerous glint flashed in his eyes, and his glance over my shoulder told me all I needed to know. Surrounded again. That seemed to be happening a lot.
"I'm afraid, ma'am, the time when you had that chance is long past."
All friendliness now gone from his tone. I nodded and spread my arms out to the side, palms up, balls of fire sprouting into existence above them. He flinched. Hesitation killed more warriors than almost anything else.